A silver dollar dropped onto the wooden bar. Clack. Dry laughter rolled through the saloon. 3 days, that was the wager. 24 names had been carved into the memory of the old man sitting silent in the corner. 24 women who had climbed that mountain and come down faster than they had gone up. The barkeep wiped glasses that would never come fully clean and said nothing. Outside, snow fell thick over the dark ridges, and the wind howled across Iron Peak like something crying in the night. Then the door swung open. A man walked in, snow-crusted in his beard, his eyes carrying something he could not quite understand. "She's here." The room went still. She had given 2 different names at the depot. She had carried a rifle the whole way, never slept once, only watched out the window as if memorizing every exit. And tonight, she would climb the mountain alone, in the dark, in the heart of a December storm. The barkeep set his rag down, very slowly. "This one," he said quietly. "I won't be taking any bets on, outside." In the falling snow, a figure already stood before the general store. A gloved hand rested on the hilt of a knife at her belt. She raised her head toward the black peak rising in the distance and stepped. The bet was 3 days. Carter Briggs slapped his silver dollar on the bar at Holloway's saloon like a man who'd done this before, because he had, 24 times. He'd lost twice, won the rest, and considered himself something of an expert on the subject of women who climbed Iron Peak and came back down faster than they went up. 3 days, Carter said. "I'm being generous." Old Ezra Fitch sat in the corner with his coffee gone cold and said nothing. He always said nothing during the betting, just watched. Watched and remembered every name, every face, every woman who'd made the climb with hope in her luggage and left with something hollowed out of her instead. 24 names. He knew all of them. The barkeep, a thick-necked man named Dutch, who'd survived things these frontier boys couldn't imagine, didn't join the betting anymore. Hadn't since number 17. Just wiped glasses that would never come fully clean and let the boys have their fun. Then the stagecoach door opened. Thomas Wade walked in with snow in his beard and something new in his eyes. Not unease exactly, more like the look a man gets when he's carried something he doesn't quite understand and is relieved to put it down. "She's here," Thomas said. The room went quiet. "All ready?" Carter frowned. Aldridge's telegram said end of the month. Well, Thomas moved to the bar, accepted the glass Dutch poured without asking, drank half. "She's here now, and boys." He set the glass down. This one carried a rifle the whole way from the depot. Didn't sleep once during the journey. Just watched the landscape, like she was memorizing every exit. Carter snorted. "They're all different until they meet what's waiting up there." "No," Thomas drank the rest. "I mean it. This woman. She gave 2 names, actually. Petch. Then Voss, which I did not ask about. She had eyes like—" He stopped, searched, didn't find it. She didn't look scared, not even close. Every other woman Aldridge sent for, they had something human in their face. Hope, fear, desperation. Pick one. This woman looked like she was walking toward a job that needed doing. Silence. Where is she now? Mercer's. Getting supplies. Thomas paused. She said she's heading up tonight. Tonight. Carter's eyes went wide. The trail's a killer in daylight. In the dark. In December. I told her that. What'd she say? Thomas picked up his glass, found it empty, set it back down. She said darkness didn't bother her much anymore. Dutch set down his rag slowly. In his experience, people who talked like that had either seen too much or done too much. Usually both. "I won't be taking any bets on this one," Dutch said quietly. The others looked at him funny. Dutch just shook his head and went back to his glasses. The ones that would never come fully clean, no matter how long he wiped them. Rowena Petch stood in Mercer's general store and did not browse. She selected 3 boxes of ammunition, different calibers, dried meat, salt, waterproof matches, a whetstone, medical supplies, the serious kind, the kind for wounds that needed stitching in the dark, without a doctor, bandages enough for real damage, a needle already threaded and stored in wax. Percy Mercer watched her from behind his counter, with his spectacles sliding down his nose and his hands doing nervous things with his apron. "Ma'am," he tried. Carefully. "Are you certain about these particular items? Most ladies arriving for Mr. Aldridge tend toward more." "How much?" Not a question. Percy's mouth closed. He calculated. $14 even. Rowena counted out exact change from a leather pouch. Her hands were steady, calloused. Not the hands of a woman who'd lived soft. Percy noticed something else when her coat shifted. A knife handle at her belt. Another at her ankle. He was almost certain of it. The trail, Percy started. North edge of town. "But ma'am, in this weather at night, men have died on it." "I know," she shouldered her pack. "Men die everywhere." The bell above the door chimed her exit. Cold air swirled through like a ghost leaving. Percy stood there a long moment. Then he walked to his back office, pulled out the ledger he kept hidden behind the flour sacks. He'd never told anyone about this ledger, not even Dutch. He opened it to the page with the column labeled "Arrived" and the column labeled "Depart," and he found the next empty line, "Voss R," he wrote. December 3rd, 1883. He left the departure column blank. He always did at first. But his finger hovered over the page longer than usual, and something made him not close the book the way he usually did. He just left it open. The trail north, out of Settlers Creek, started gentle enough. It always did. That was the trap Rowena had been warned about, the ice on the switchbacks. The wind at the third ridge. The stretch between the two rock formations where you couldn't see your own boots. She'd been warned by Thomas on the stagecoach, by Percy at the store, and before that by the woman at the depot in Silver City who'd looked at Rowena's supply list and said quietly, "That's not what brides pack." No, it wasn't. The first hour was just walking, cold air burning her lungs, town lights shrinking behind her until they were just scattered sparks in the dark. The rifle across her back shifted with each step. Familiar weight. She'd carried weapons long enough that moving without one felt like something missing, like an amputated thing. The second hour, the trail steepened. Switchbacks cut up the mountain face, each turn revealing more vertical climb ahead. Wind came off the peak and hit her like something that had been waiting. Rowena didn't slow. She'd learned what hesitation cost. You picked a direction, you moved. Second-guessing was a luxury for people who had options. She didn't have options. Not anymore. Not since October. Not since the kitchen floor. Don't think about the kitchen floor. The third hour, her legs started burning. The kind of burn that meant real work. She welcomed it. Pain was information. Pain meant she was still upright, still moving, still one step ahead of everything behind her, which was the only lead that mattered. The fourth hour brought something she hadn't expected. Tricks at the edges of her vision. Shadows shaped like men. Trees that bent in the wind in ways that looked deliberate. Her mind doing what minds do when the body is pushed past comfortable, and the dark is deep enough to fill with whatever you're most afraid of. She'd been most afraid of Gerald once. Now Gerald was dead, so the dark filled with other things. Warrants. The sound of her name spoken in a courtroom, by a man who'd never once met her. Cold-blooded, they'd said. Premeditated, as though planning to survive somehow made it worse. Rowena pushed through it. The fifth hour almost killed her, a patch of ice under fresh snow. Her boot went out. For one terrible second she was sliding backward, rifle slamming her spine, the void below her absolute black, gravity reaching up like it had been patient, and finally its turn. She threw herself sideways, got one hand around a rock outcropping, felt her shoulder wrench, hung there, breathing. Below her, nothing visible. The drop could have been 20 feet, could have been 200. Either way, let go, said the part of her that had been calculating the arithmetic of her situation for 6 weeks. It's simpler. Rowena disagreed with that part. She always had, even at the worst of it. Even when Gerald had locked the bedroom door, and she'd sat there, adding up the math of her life, and the numbers kept coming out wrong. She'd disagreed with that voice. Argued back. Kept arguing. Her hands were bleeding through her gloves. By the time she pulled herself back to solid ground, she checked them. Not bad. Nothing that needed stitching. She kept climbing. The cabin appeared the way landmarks do in the dark, without warning. One moment there was nothing but forest and snow, and the absence of anything built by human hands, and then a clearing. And in the clearing, massive and dark against the pewter sky, something that was less a cabin than a statement. Heavy timber walls. Small windows set deep, like eyes narrowed against the wind. A chimney rising cold and smokeless. No lights. No movement. Rowena approached with the rifle no longer slung but held. Her instincts had opinions about this place. Loud ones. She was 20 feet from the door when it opened. No knock. No announcement. Just open. A man stood in the frame, backlit by a lantern inside, which meant she couldn't see his face, only his shape. And his shape was, she adjusted her mental catalog of large men. This man reset the top of that list. 6.5 feet at minimum. Shoulders that filled the doorway, but what stopped her wasn't the size. It was the way he stood. Most big men stood like they were apologizing for the space they took up. Unconscious habit. The world had made them aware of themselves. This man stood like the doorway was lucky to have him in it. "You're early," he said. His voice had not been used much lately. It had that sound, rough from disuse, like a hinge that worked but preferred not to. Plans changed. Telegram said end of the month. Telegrams are approximations. Rowena kept the rifle low but present. "You Cormac Aldridge?" "I am." They stood in the dark, measuring each other. She could feel him doing it. The systematic assessment she recognized, because she did it herself constantly. Looking for weakness. Looking for whatever he'd missed in the 24 women before her that told him they'd run. "You going to invite me in?" she said. "Or do we conduct this arrangement out here in the snow?" Something moved in his expression. The lantern light was wrong for reading faces, but she thought it might have been amusement. Might have been contracts, already legal enough for government work. "You sent acceptance." "I sent money. That's binding in this territory," he paused. "So, you come in. Or you go back down. Your choice." Rowena walked forward. She expected him to move aside as she reached the door. He didn't. Just stood there, solid as the mountain itself, forcing her to either stop or squeeze past him through the frame. A test. She recognized it for what it was immediately. "Will you flinch at my size? Will proximity make you step back?" And she walked through without slowing. Her shoulder touched his chest for exactly 1 second. She felt him go still. The specific stillness of someone unused to being approached without fear. Good, she thought. Let him be the uncomfortable one for a change. Inside was not what she'd expected. She'd prepared expectations carefully. A man living alone this long on a mountain, sending for 24 women who'd all left. She'd expected the wreckage of someone who'd given up on the concept of a livable space. Instead, clean floors, tools hung where tools belonged. A fireplace large enough to heat the whole room, currently banked low. Furniture that looked handmade, heavy, functional, nothing decorative. Shelves along one wall holding supplies in organized rows. Dried meat, coffee, flour, ammunition counted and stacked with a precision that spoke of someone who'd learned to account for everything. Military precision. Or close to it, one rifle above the mantel. Another beside the door, both positioned for fast access from multiple points in the room. And then there was the thing she hadn't expected, a bowl on a high shelf, set back against the wall at a specific height, maybe 6 feet off the ground. The bowl had food in it. Fresh, placed today. Rowena looked up, nothing. Just the peaked ceiling, the support beams disappearing into shadow. The eyes, she almost didn't see them. They were so still, set back in the deepest shadow where the wall met the rafter. Something crouched, something small, something that was watching her with an absolute absence of the thing you expected from children. Which was hope. No hope in those eyes. Only the flat, continuous calculation of a creature that had learned to survive by deciding in the first 3 seconds whether something was threat or not yet threat, Cormac closed the door behind her. Heavy thud, that's why they leave, he said. Rowena looked at thighs in the rafters, looked at the bowl on the shelf, looked at the careful placement, high enough that whoever was up there could reach it without coming down too far. Thought about the 24 women. Thought about why they'd actually left. Not the man. Never the man, the child. What's his name, she said. Amos, how long? 9 months. Does he come down? When I'm asleep. Takes food from the shelf. I leave extra at night. A longer pause. I tried once early on to bring him down, hold him, show him he was safe. Cormac stopped, set his jaw. He bit through my hand. 3 stitches. Rowena looked at the shelf, at the bowl. At the specific, deliberate height of it, this man had engineered the entire cabin around the habits of a child who wouldn't come down from the ceiling. Every shelf placement, every food station, every sightline from the rafters. She could see it now that she was looking. The whole space was built around keeping Amos, fed without making him feel cornered. 24 women had walked into this room and seen a feral child and decided that wasn't what they'd signed up. Rowena looked up at the eyes in the rafters and recognized them, not Amos specifically, not this particular child. But the thing behind his eyes, she knew that. She'd seen it in her own reflection in the years before October. The specific look of someone who has done the arithmetic on trusting people and found the numbers don't add up. He can stay up there, Rowena said. Cormac blinked. The others tried to coax him down. I'm not going to coax him. She set her pack on the floor. I'm not going to try anything with him. He can stay up there until he decides differently. Silence. You can take the loft. Ladder in the corner. Trunk up there with blankets. Water barrels by the door, filled every morning. Privy out back. He paused. I don't expect you to cook for me. Rowena raised an eyebrow. No rules? No expectations? 1. His eyes found hers and held them, hard as the frozen ground outside. Don't interfere with Amos. Whatever you think about how to handle him. Don't. Wasn't planning to. She picked up her pack. Headed for the ladder. Where do you sleep? Down here. She started climbing. The others, Cormac said. She stopped. Didn't turn. They lasted anywhere from 12 hours to 9 days. Longest was a woman from Boise who made it through full week before Amos threw a tin cup at her, and she decided she hadn't signed up for projectiles. Rowena climbed another rung. I'm not them. They all said that. They said it hoping it was true. She reached the top of the ladder, looked down at him from the loft edge. This enormous, ruined-looking man standing in his carefully organized cabin, with his one rule and his 24 failures and his child in the rafters. I know it is. She disappeared into the loft. Cormac stood alone in the main room. After a long moment, he looked up at the rafters. Amos was still there, still watching. But his eyes had shifted from the place where Rowena had been standing to the loft entrance where she'd gone. And Cormac, who had been watching Amos for 9 months and knew every variation of his stillness, thought he saw something new. Not fear, not calculation, curiosity. She didn't sleep, not that first night. The loft was cold even with the trunk's blankets, a straw mattress, a small window masked on black sky and falling snow, the bare minimum of shelter. Rowena lay fully dressed, rifle within reach. Listening, Cormac moved downstairs. The scrape of a fire poker, the creak of the chair by the hearth. He sat there all night by the sound of it, not sleeping either, and above it all, almost nothing, almost silent. The very careful, very deliberate, almost nothing of a small person moving across wooden beams who didn't want to be heard. Amos, she tracked him, heard him work his way along the rafters until he was positioned above the loft. Not close enough to drop down, just above her, looking, doing his calculation, running his numbers on whether this new variable in his environment represented danger or something else. Rowena didn't move, didn't acknowledge him, just lay there with her breathing steady and deliberate. I know you're there. I'm not pretending I don't know, and I'm not doing anything about it. After a long time, he retreated. Back to his corner, she heard Cormac add wood to the fire somewhere around 3 in the morning. She heard the wind outside, and she thought about Gerald, which she always tried not to do after dark, because the dark gave the memories more room than they deserved. Gerald Leland Petch, mine owner, civic donor, man who shook other men's hands and made them feel important, and came home to Pueblo and locked the front door, and became something that didn't have a polite name. 2 years. She'd survived 2 years. And then October, and the kitchen floor, and his blood, which had been darker than she'd expected, and her hands shaking while she packed a bag, taking his horse, his rifle, his traveling money, leaving the knife in his chest, because she was never going to touch that knife again. Murder, the warrant said, not survival. Not self-defense, which wasn't a concept the law found compelling when the dead man was wealthy and well-connected, and the woman who'd killed him was just a woman who should have found a better way. There was no better way. She'd looked for one. For 2 years she'd looked for one and there wasn't one. And she'd done what was left to do. And now she was here, on Iron Peak, in a loft above a man she didn't know and below a child who lived in the ceiling, hiding in the most frightening place anyone had suggested, because the man who lived there had a reputation, terrifying enough that no one would think to look. It was, objectively, the best plan she'd had in months. She closed her eyes at dawn, not sleeping, just resting them against the coming day. Breakfast was salt pork, fried potatoes, and coffee. Real coffee. Rowena hadn't had real coffee in 6 weeks. She stood at the stove holding the cup with both hands, and acknowledged privately that this was the best thing that had happened to her since Colorado, low bar still. Good coffee, Cormac, cooked without commentary. No good morning, no pleasantries, no attempt to perform domestic ease. Just food, efficiently made, set on the table with 2 plates. He took his plate to the chair by the fire. She stood with her back to the wall, facing both the front door and the rafters. Old habit. Gerald had cornered her at tables, used the furniture to cut off her angles. She'd sworn never to sit with her back exposed again. Cormac noticed her position. She could see him notice it. He didn't commentate to him. "You don't sleep much," she said. "Sleep is a liability out here." He ate with the same efficiency he cooked with. No wasted motion. You learn that or the mountain teaches it for you. She looked up at the rafters. No Amos visible. But she could feel the weight of attention, the specific sensation of being watched with complete concentration. She'd developed that sensitivity under Gerald's roof. He eat last night? Shelf was empty this morning. Good, she drank her coffee. When you found him. Where exactly? Cormac was quiet for a moment. Then, root cellar, under a burned-out homestead 11 miles north. Family was gone. Looked like a raid. Silas Greer's land-clearing crew works that stretch of valley. Pays men to look like something they're not when they do the dirty work. Boy had been down there alone. A pause. I don't know how long. Rowena looked at the high shelf with the bowl. I don't know how long. A child alone in the dark under a burned house, not knowing if anyone was coming. Running survival calculations with no data, no resources, nothing but the decision to keep breathing. Same arithmetic she'd been doing for 2 years. How old is he? Best I can figure. 7, maybe 8. Hard to tell. He's small, because he's been starving. Not anymore. And something in Cormac's voice when he said that. Flat, immediate. Not defensive but absolute. Told her everything about this man's priorities that she needed to know. He'd built his whole life around that shelf. Cormac left after breakfast to check the trap line. 3 miles north along the eastern ridge. He'd be back before dark. He told her the loaded rifle positions. Told her about wolves this time of year. About drifters who sometimes came through the higher trails and had the kind of ideas that solitude gave men about women alone. You know how to use it, he said. Not a question. Better than most men you've met. He looked at her with that considering expression she was starting to catalog. His version of a response. Then he pulled on his coat and headed for the door. Stopped with his hand on the latch. Amos, he said without turning around. "If he comes down while I'm gone, he won't. Don't try to touch him. Don't try to talk him down. Just let him be," she said. "I know." A pause. He left. The door closed like it meant it. Rowena counted to 60, listening to his boots crunch away through the snow. When she was certain the sound had faded to nothing, she looked up. Amos was directly above the kitchen area, pressed against a vertical support, pale face in the shadow, breathing fast. She could see it in the movement of his thin chest. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said. "No coddling in it. No soft edges. Just a fact stated flatly. And I'm not going to try to make you come down or be something you're not. I'm going to wash these dishes. You can watch or you can leave. Neither one bothers me." She turned her back on him. Every instinct she had screamed at this decision. Gerald's house had wired her nervous system to keep threats in sight at all times. Turning your back on something unknown was how you ended up cornered, but she'd meant what she said. And she wasn't going to be the 25th woman to run this child off with nervous energy and desperate coaxing attempts. She washed the plates, the pan. Ordinary sounds. Cold water from the barrel, sand and rag for the iron. Nothing threatening, nothing fast behind her. Silence, then a sound, a shift of weight, brick fabric, on wood, close. She kept washing. Minutes passed, much closer. She turned slowly. Amos was on the floor 10 feet away, crouched low with his weight on the balls of his feet, ready to go back up in a second. Every line of him braced for launch. His clothes were worse than she'd thought from the rafters. A shirt that had once been white. Pants held with rope. His feet wrapped in strips of cloth coming unwound. No shoes. His face was all angles. Cheekbones too sharp. Eyes too large for it. The face of a child whose body has been diverting all available resources to survival rather than growth. And on his forearms, just visible below the ragged sleeves, thin white lines. Scars. Rowena didn't look at the scars too long. She knew what it was to not want someone cataloging your damage. "There's leftover potatoes in the pan," she said, "and the rest of the pork. I'm not going to bring it to you, and I'm not going to watch you eat it." She moved away from the stove, gave him a clear line to it. "But it's there if you want it." She turned back to the dishes. Silence then, fast. The whisper of small feet. A scrape of pan on iron. A retreat. When she turned around, the pan was empty. Amos was gone. Back to the rafters, smart child. Didn't waste time. Didn't trust the opportunity would last. She'd been the same way with food in Gerald's house toward the end, when punishment meant locked rooms. And the only food was whatever she'd had the foresight to hide in her pockets at meals. Eat fast. Eat when you can. Never know when the next chance comes. She finished the dishes, then did what she always did in a new space. Surveyed it, cataloged it, exits first. Weapons, medical supplies. Ammunition enough for a small war. Cormac Aldridge had not come to Iron Peak to be comfortable. He'd come to be unassailable. She understood that logic entirely. She was examining the trap mechanisms along the west wall when she heard it. Horses. More than one. Coming up from below, she moved to the window, cracked at the shutter. 3 riders. Still a ways down the trail, but clear enough, and even at this distance she could read them. Not trappers. Clothes too deliberate. Not prospectors. They carried themselves wrong. Too upright. Too practiced. The lead rider wore a long, dark coat. Something caught the light on his chest. A badge. Rowena's stomach went cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. She grabbed the rifle from above the mantel, checked the load, stepped back from the window. The riders were picking their way toward the cabin, with the careful pace of men who'd been told to look casual and had decided casual meant slow. There were tells. She knew all of them now. The hands not quite resting, just near the gun belt. The eyes moving in a specific pattern, door, windows, angles, back to door. The way the 2 flanking riders had spread slightly, giving the lead man room to react. Professional. These were not men who'd ridden up Iron Peak out of curiosity. The lead rider dismounted 50 yards out. The other 2 stayed mounted. 1 man visible, 2 positioned for pursuit. A knock on the door. Solid. Authoritative. Open up. Territorial business. Rowena ran her options. Fast ho, they'd seen the chimney smoke. They knew someone was here. Shoot through the door. 3 armed men. And killing lawmen, even dishonest ones, brought the kind of attention that made everything worse. Run. Out the window, into the forest. Leave Amos. She looked up at the rafters. At Amos's pale face watching her with those enormous calculating eyes. She put the rifle down, checked her knife, smoothed her dress, opened the door. The man outside had a face like a hatchet blade. Sharp edges everywhere. Jaw, cheekbones, the line of his mouth. He touched his hat brim with the reflex courtesy of someone who'd practiced looking civil. Ma'am. Sorry to disturb. Deputy Harlan Quill. Out of the territorial office, he showed his badge. We're following a fugitive through this area. Woman traveling alone. Armed. Possibly dangerous. You seen anyone matching that description? Just got here myself a few days ago, Rowena said. Haven't seen anyone except my husband, your husband. Quill's eyes settled. That'd be Cormac Aldridge, that's right. Heard about him, down in town. A thin smile. Not warm, not meant to be. Heard he goes through brides like most men go through boots. You must be number 25. I must be. Also heard the others don't last long. Mountain gets to people. Drives them a little. He made a gesture. Loose. I'm not particularly loose, Rowena said. No. I can see that. Something reassembled itself in his expression into professional interest. Mind if we come in? Warm up a bit? Long, cold ride up that trail. She did mind. Minded enormously. But refusing would be suspicious, and these men would come in whether she agreed or not. She stepped aside. Quill entered first. The other 2 followed, tracking snow, spreading naturally into positions that covered the room. Professional to the bone. These weren't occasional lawmen, doing a county sheriff a favor. These were men who'd done this before. Many times. Coffee? Rowena offered. That'd be kind. She went to the stove. Back to them, which she hated. Which she had no choice about, if she was going to maintain the performance. She poured 3 cups. Hands that did not shake. She'd learned that control under Gerald. Fear was inevitable. Displaying it was optional. She turned around to hand out the cups. Quill had settled into the chair by the fire with the ease of a man who considered any chair he sat in temporarily his. The shorter man, a scar dividing his left eyebrow, was moving along the supply shelves, eyes cataloging. The third man, young with a pretty face that probably caused trouble in saloons, was moving toward the ladder to the loft. I'd rather you didn't, Rowena said. Quiet. But something in the register of it made both men pause. Quill raised an eyebrow. That right. You're guests in my husband's house. He wouldn't appreciate strangers going through his things. We've got authority from the territorial office. Means we go where we need to go. Quill stood. The false courtesy dropped away. What was under it was older. Harder. Now. You can make this easy, or you can make this a situation. But either way, we have a look around and then, above them, a sound. Just a whisper. Just the weight of something small, shifting on a beam. But Quill heard it. His eyes snapped upward. Found Amos in the shadows. Well, his voice changed. Sharpened. Who's that? My husband's ward. Rowena kept her voice flat. He's been through something. He doesn't come down for strangers. That right. Quill walked to the center of the room, looking up. Come down, boy. Just want to ask you a few questions. Amos didn't move, I said. Come on down. He doesn't talk, Rowena said. Not to anyone he doesn't know. Quill drew his pistol, not pointing it anywhere specific. Just having it out. A demonstration of what could be pointed somewhere. Maybe we'll just go up and get him then. The young man started for the ladder. Rowena moved without deciding to. Stepped between him and it, her hand on her knife. Not hiding it, don't. The young man stopped, looked at Quill. Quill examined Rowena with new attention. Mighty protective of a child you've known a few days. I don't like bullies. Her voice was still even. Specifically, I don't like armed men using children as leverage. You've seen the cabin. There's no fugitive here. Time for you to go, the short man laughed. You're giving orders now? Facts, Rowena said. My husband is due back shortly. And when he arrives and finds 3 strange men making his wife uncomfortable. She let that sit for a moment. You've heard what people say about Cormac Aldridge. I'd consider whether those stories are exaggerated before you decide to still be here. Quill waited. She could see him doing it. Push harder. Risk a confrontation with a man whose reputation had reached far enough to give even Quill pause. Or pull back. Gather information. Return with more resources. He holstered his pistol with deliberate slowness. We'll be moving on, he said. But we'll be working this area. Other cabins. Other questions. And if we find out someone's been less than cooperative, he touched his hat brim. The false courtesy back in place like a mask. We'll be back. You'll find my husband here when you do. They left. She watched through the window as they mounted. They didn't rush, didn't look back, just rode back toward the trail with the specific unhurried confidence of men who decided to be patient. Quill was the last to go. At the tree line, he stopped his horse, turned in the saddle, looked directly at the cabin window, looked directly at her. Even though she was behind the shutter, he shouldn't have been able to see her. He knew anyway, she was certain of it. He rode into the trees. Rowena let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her hand was cramping from the knife grip. She released it, flexed her fingers. Behind her, a sound. Almost descended from the rafters faster than she'd seen him move. Dropped the last 4 feet to the floor in a crouch, landed quiet as a cat and straightened. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him yet. Not fear. Not calculation. Assessment. Like he'd just watched her perform a task and was deciding whether her technique was sound. That was stupid, Rowena said aloud. Not to Amos. To herself, mostly. I should have let them search. Played frightened. Now they're suspicious. Amos's head moved. Small? No. She looked at him. You disagree. He looked at the ladder, back at her. Made a small gesture she couldn't fully read. You should go back up there, she said. They might come back. Safer if. Another headshake. Smaller, but still clear. He moved to the corner behind the woodbox. Sat down with his back against the wall, knees pulled up, watching her. Not in the rafters, not hiding. Just here, on the floor. At her level, it was not nothing. She understood that Rowena sat down in the chair Quill had vacated. Her legs felt unreliable. Reaction setting in now that the performance was over. The particular exhaustion of having to be calm through something terrifying. She knew this tired specifically. She'd felt it after every one of Gerald's bad nights. After a moment, Amos moved. Slow, deliberate. He extended one finger and touched the handle of the knife at her belt. Touched it the way a child touches something that has impressed them. Then looked up at her face. You have weapons, the look said. Yes, Rowena said quietly. I have weapons, and if those men come back, she held his gaze, I'll use them. That's a promise. Amos withdrew his hand. He didn't go back to the rafters. Just pulled his knees tighter and stayed in his corner, watching the door, watching her. His eyes moving between the two with the same rhythmic patrol she was doing herself. They sat like that. Woman and child, both running from different versions of the same category of thing. Both watching the same door. When Cormac came back an hour before dark. 3 short knocks, pause. 2 more. Rowena had the door open before he finished. He came in with 2 rabbits across the saddle horn and snow in his beard and stopped when he saw a moss on the floor instead of the ceiling. He looked at Rowena. She told him about Quill. Every word of it, watching his face go from still to stone, to somewhere past stone, that had its own particular quality. She noticed he didn't ask, why didn't you let them search, or you should have been more careful. He asked, what did he say exactly? Which direction did they ride? How many horses? Information. Tactical. When she finished, Cormac nodded once, Harlan Quill. He said, you know him, Pinkerton man. Same years I was. He moved to the fire, stood with his back to it. Doesn't use the badge for justice. Uses it for access. Once he's on a scent, he stopped, looked at her. He won't stop. Then we don't wait for him to come back. And something moved through Cormac's expression. Something she couldn't name precisely because she'd never seen it on a man's face directed at her before. Not surprise. Not quite respect. Recognition. Like he'd spent 9 months having one kind of conversation with 24 different women. And this was the first time someone had said exactly what he would have said. He went to the trunk in the corner, pulled out a gun belt, 2 holstered revolvers, older model but clean, checked the cylinders, loaded both, strapped them on with the ease of someone reacquainting themselves with something they'd set aside. "Tell me everything he said," Cormac said. "Word for word, I already." Again, word for word, she told him again. He listened differently this time, not for facts, for tone, for what Quill had not said, for the shape of what was coming. In the corner behind the woodbox, Amos watched them both. When Rowena finished the second telling, Amos reached under his shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper, flattened it on the floor in front of him. A drawing, done in charcoal, crude but unmistakably detailed. The cabin from above, the clearing, the 3 trail approaches, and 3 small figures on the main trail, marked with X's at specific intervals. He'd been drawing the angles, the approach vectors, the places where men coming up from below would be exposed, and the places where they wouldn't. Cormac stared at the drawing for a long moment, then looked at Rowena. "He's been up there 9 months, Rowena said quietly. "He's been watching every trail approach since you brought him home." Cormac crouched down, picked up the paper, studied it with the focused attention of a man who understood what he was looking at. "Smart boy," he said. Not loudly, not to make a point of it, just a statement of fact. Amos didn't respond. But he didn't look away either, and Cormac, who had spent 9 months watching every variation of that child's stillness, saw something he hadn't seen before, the corners of Amos's mouth, just barely. Not quite a smile, not yet, but almost. The storm came the next morning. Not a polite storm, not the kind that builds slowly and gives you time to prepare and feel virtuous about your preparations. This one arrived like it had somewhere to be, full force, full fury, the kind of December weather that the Idaho Territory used to remind everyone that the mountains had been here before people arrived and would be here long after people stopped trying. Cormac stood at the window for exactly 30 seconds. 5 days, he said, maybe 6. Rowena looked at the white wall where the tree line had been. "You can tell that from looking? You learn to read it or the mountain reads you instead." He turned from the window. "Trail will be impassable, nobody coming up, nobody going down," which meant Quill couldn't reach them, which was the good news. The bad news was they were locked in a cabin, on a mountainside with enough ammunition for a small uprising and a child who lived in the rafters. "Well," Rowena said, "better than the alternative." Cormac looked at her with that look she was beginning to recognize as his version of agreement. Day 1 of the storm. Cormac showed her things she hadn't noticed. Narrow slits in the timber walls, positioned to give sight lines across the clearing without exposing anyone inside. Ammunition distributed to 3 different points in the room. A trapdoor in the pantry floor leading down to a root cellar, stocked with enough supplies to last weeks. "You built this place expecting trouble," Rowena said. "I built this place expecting everything." He closed the pantry door. "Isolation doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you accurate." She looked at the gun ports disguised as timber gaps, at the rifle positions, at the careful geometry of sight lines and cover. "You were Pinkerton," she said. "Before the mountain, 5 years, and before that, a longer pause. Union Army. 61 through 65, she did the arithmetic. He'd have been in his early 20s during the war." She looked at his hands, at the particular way he stood, weight on both feet, perfectly balanced, the stance of someone who'd learned a long time ago that the ground could become a problem at any second. "The things you did for Pinkerton," she said carefully. "That's why you left, not a question." He looked at her. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I did what I was ordered to do, which was legal and wrong. He went to the fire, picked up the poker, worked the coals unnecessarily. There's a category of things that are both those things simultaneously. Most people don't encounter it. I encountered it often enough that I stopped being willing to. So you came up here. So I came up here. Rowena looked at the root cellar trapdoor, at the gun ports, at all the careful, lonely architecture of a man who'd decided the safest thing he could do for the world was remove himself from it. And then you found Amos, she said. The poker stopped moving. And then I found Amos, he said. Day 2. Amos came down from the rafters while Rowena was cleaning her rifle. Not all the way. He dropped to a beam about 8 feet off the floor and sat there with his legs dangling, watching. She'd pulled the rifle apart on the kitchen table, barrel, action, stock, and was working through the components with rag and oil. She narrated, not to him specifically, just out loud, this is the barrel. This is where everything starts and everything ends, depending on how you think about it. She ran the rag through, held it to the light. You keep it clean, or it fights you when you need it most. Out here, a gun that jams doesn't just inconvenience you. She picked up the action. This is where the decision happens. Chamber loads, hammer strikes, cartridge fires. Most people think shooting is about the trigger. It isn't. It's about everything that happens before the trigger. She looked up. Amos had moved to a lower beam. 6 feet. Then 5.5. She looked back down. The trigger is just the commitment. You've already made the decision by then. The decision happens up here. She touched her temple. Or it should. If you're doing it right, the lightest possible landing. She kept her eyes on the table. Amos was on the floor. 4 feet away. Crouched in his usual ready-to-launch position. But here, at floor level, watching the rifle components with an expression she recognized, hunger, but not food hunger. The hunger of a mind that wants to understand how something works. Want to see the whole sequence? She asked. He didn't move, but he didn't move away either. She took that as yes. She walked through the full assembly. Slow, naming each piece, explaining each connection. Why the screw went in this direction, why the spring seated this way, why the specific angle of the firing pin mattered. Amos moved forward once, just an inch, stopped himself. Rowena kept talking, kept her eyes on the table, gave him the privacy of not being watched. By the time she finished the assembly, he was sitting cross-legged on the floor 18 inches away. She set the rifle down between them. Not loaded, she said. Won't hurt anything. He stared at it for a long time, then his hand came out. Slow, stopped halfway, started again. His fingers touched the stock and jerked back. Nothing happened. He touched it again. Let his palm rest on the wood. That one's yours now, Rowena said. If you want it. He looked up at her. Your responsibility. Your job to keep it clean and respect what it is. She held his gaze. And never pointed at something you don't intend to stop. His hand closed around the stock. Slowly, completely. From the chair by the fire, Cormac watched and said nothing, which was exactly the right response. Night 4 of the storm, Rowena woke to a sound that was wrong, wrong rhythm, wrong weight. She was down the loft ladder in 4 seconds, rifle in hand. The main room was still. Cormac in his chair, she'd come to understand that was his version of going to bed. He didn't use the floor. Just the one chair, sitting up, which said several things about how he'd learned to sleep during the war, and had never fully unlearned. Amos in his corner behind the wood box. The rifle she'd given him propped against the wall beside him. The sound again. Outside, but close. She moved to the east window. Cracked the shutter the width of a finger, snow still falling. The storm pressing down, and in the snow, movement. Not wind movement. Deliberate movement, a shape, circling. She crossed to Cormac, put her hand on his shoulder. He was awake before she touched him. She felt it, the shift from sleep to alert in a fraction of a second. No confusion, no slow surface, just immediately present. East side, she said quietly. He was up. Rifle from beside the chair. At the window in 3 steps, 1 man, he said. Maybe 2. Working the perimeter. Quills, has to be. His face went hard. He sent a scout up before the storm got too bad. Left him to watch. They looked at each other. And then Cormac did something she hadn't expected. He almost smiled. Small. Barely there. What? She said. He sent 1 man to watch a cabin with 2 rifles. And a woman who climbs mountains in the dark. He moved toward the door. That's either a compliment or a mistake. Probably both. He went out into the storm 7 minutes, which was a long 7 minutes. Then he came back through the door with a man under 1 arm, who was very much not happy about it. Medium height. Young. Maybe 25. Cold and miserable, and bleeding from 1 eyebrow where he'd apparently had a disagreement with the snow. Cormac set him in the chair. Not gently, the man looked at Rowena. Looked at the rifle she was pointing at him. Looked back at Cormac. There's just me, the man said. I swear. Just me. How long have you been circling? Cormac said. Since yesterday morning. Quill sent you, not a question. The man stopped trying to find a useful lie. He wants to know the layout. How many ways in? Who's inside? A pause. And he knows about the boy. The room went very still. What about the boy? Cormac said. And something in his voice made the young man decide very quickly that the truth was the only viable option he had left. Silas Greer, he said. The man who owns the valley land north of here. He's offering money, for the boy specifically. Deputy Quills got an arrangement with him. What kind of arrangement? The boy saw something. At that burned homestead. Greer needs him. He stopped. Tried a different word. Greer needs him not available to testify. The fire crackled. Rowena looked at Cormac. His face had gone through stone to somewhere past stone. Somewhere with no name on the map, Amos was behind the woodbox. His eyes were open, wide open. He'd heard every word, because of course he had. How many men is Quill bringing? Cormac said. 10. Maybe more. Waiting for the storm to break. The young man's voice had gotten smaller. He doesn't leave things unfinished. He never has, I know, Cormac said. 2 words, the flatness of them. The specific weight of someone saying, I know about a person they've had cause to know very well, made the young man stop talking entirely. They put the scout in the root cellar, not cruelly. Blankets, water, enough food for several days. The trapdoor latched from outside. He could survive down there comfortably enough. He just couldn't get out. Amos watched the whole process from his corner. Not from the rafters, from the floor. He'd been at floor level all evening and showed no intention of going back up. When the trapdoor was closed, Cormac sat at the table, spread out the hand-drawn map he'd been adding to since Rowena arrived. Quiet since the interrogation. Not the regular quiet, a different kind. Tighter. Tell me about Quill, Rowena said. We worked together for 3 years. He's methodical, patient. He builds a complete picture before he moves, and when he moves decisively. Cormac looked at the map. He won't underestimate us twice. He underestimated us once already. He sent 1 man to watch. He'll know now that we caught him. He'll recalibrate. His finger traced the main trail. He'll come with everyone, all at once. And he'll split them. Multiple approaches. 3. Maybe 4. He looked at her. You read terrain. My husband liked to hunt, she said. I learned to keep up. She didn't explain why keeping up had mattered. He understood the shape of what she wasn't saying. She pulled the map toward her. The main trail. Widest, most obvious. The Eastern Game Trail. Steeper, known only to locals. The Northern Canyon approach. Narrow, brutal. The best flanking position. Here, she said. Pointed to a rock formation. The path narrows between these 2 outcroppings. 60, 70 yards of exposure before they can reach anything to cover behind. That's where I was thinking. You take the low position. The fallen log, it's all ready. Cover. I go high. She traced the elevation line. This outcropping gives me a clear angle and crossfire with your position. He looked at where her finger rested on the map. You're smaller, he said. Faster to get up there, also a better shot, probably. Don't take it personally. He didn't take it personally. He also didn't deny it. which told her something about his self-assessment that she found unexpectedly reassuring. A man who couldn't accurately evaluate his own capabilities was a man who got people killed. "What about Amos?" she said. They both looked at the boy in the corner. Amos was looking back at them. "Root cellar," Cormac said. "If we both go down, he can survive there for weeks. Food, water, blankets. He knows how to stay quiet." Rowena looked at Amos. His face said several things she couldn't fully read, but one of them she thought was, "I've been hidden before, in the dark, in the cold, alone. I don't want to do that again." "He comes back up," she said, to Cormac. Then to Amos directly. "We come back. That's not negotiable." Amos's jaw tightened. He nodded. Small, definite. Day 3 of the storm. She found him at the table before dawn. Paper. A piece of brown wrapping paper Cormac had saved. A stick of charcoal. And Amos, sitting with his whole body folded over the paper, drawing with a concentration that blocked out everything else. She came down the ladder quietly, stood behind him. Looked not the cabin approach map this time, 3 figures. Crude, the way children draw, circles for heads, lines for bodies, but with details she hadn't expected. Tall and broad, with a mark on its face that she understood were the scars. One smaller with long lines for hair, and between them the smallest figure, holding something that was clearly a rifle. Underneath, in letters that had clearly been worked on very hard. Family 1 letter off. But every meaning, exactly. Right? Rena stood behind him and said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be smaller than what was on that piece of paper. After a moment, Amos became aware of her. Tensed. The old reflex, the one he couldn't quite shake. Started to pull the paper toward him and away. She put her hand on his shoulder, lightly. Ready to pull back. He froze then, slowly, like ice deciding to melt. Some of the tension released. He didn't lean into it, but he didn't flinch. Just tolerated the contact. Testing it. Trying to figure out if it was going to cost him something. Nothing happened. He looked down at his drawing. "Yeah," Rowena said quietly. "Family." He didn't respond, but he didn't take the paper away. Cormac came down an hour later and found them both at the table. Rowena with coffee, Amos with his drawing and a bowl of potatoes he'd gotten for himself, which was new. He'd always waited before. Always taken food when no one was watching. This morning he'd gotten it himself and sat down and eaten it at the table. Cormac looked at the bowl, at Amos eating openly, at Rowena not commenting on it. He poured himself coffee and sat down. Said nothing, just sat, which was somehow everything. Day 4, Amos taught himself to shoot, or tried to, with an unloaded rifle and an audience of 0. Because both Cormac and Rowena had developed the mutual understanding that the right approach to Amos learning things was to make sure no one looked directly at it while it was happening. They were at opposite ends of the cabin doing other things. Rowena reorganizing the medical supplies. She'd found a better logic for the layout that would save seconds in an emergency. Cormac repairing a section of storage shelf with a loose joint. Amos was at the far end of the main room with his rifle. They didn't watch, but they listened, the small sounds of the action working. Repeated, repeated, repeated. The click of the hammer. The careful sound of a child checking his own technique and then doing it again. Nothing random about it. No playing. No childish gunslinger posturing. Just methodical practice of a specific mechanical sequence. After a while, Rowena said, not loudly, not in Amos's direction. His grip is too wide. He'll lose control of the recoil when it's live. A pause. I know, Cormac said. From his end of the cabin, someone should probably. A pause. Not me. He's just starting to, I know. She looked at Cormac. He was already setting down his tools. He crossed the room to Amos, with the specific care of a large man, who has learned that his size reads as threat to small things and adjusts accordingly. He crouched down, at Amos's level, which put this enormous man in a genuinely undignified position relative to the furniture. Hand here, Cormac said. Just that, 2 words. Adjusted the grip position with 1 finger. Not grabbing. Just indicating. Amos looked at the adjusted position, tried it. The difference was immediate. His whole posture shifted, steadier, aligned, the stock seated correctly against his shoulder. He looked up at Cormac. Cormac nodded, stood up, went back to his shelf repair. Amos went back to his practice, and Rowena went back to her medical supplies and thought about the particular way some men showed care. Not with words, not with demonstrations, but with the precise correction of a grip that would protect a child when the moment came. Night 4 was the bad night. Rowena heard it around 2 in the morning. She was at her post by the south window. They'd been trading shifts, keeping watch, not discussing that they were both sleeping less than either of them needed. She heard it from Amos's corner, almost nothing. That was what made it terrible, the carefully controlled, barely their sobbing of a child who had learned somewhere that making noise when you cried was dangerous. His shoulders shaking, in the firelight. His face turned to the wall, trying to be invisible inside his own grief. Rowena looked at Cormac. He was at the north window. She could see from the angle of his head that he'd heard it too. She crossed the room, sat down on the floor near Amos's corner, not beside him, not close enough to crowd, and waited. She didn't say it's all right, because it wasn't. None of this was all right, and Amos was 7 years old and had lost everything, and was about to hide in a root cellar, while 2 adults he'd known for 5 days fought off armed men who wanted him dead. None of that was all right. What she said was, "I know, just that." 2 words. The crying continued. Waves of it, silent waves. Years of grief that a child his age should never have had to store. "You survived things most grown people couldn't," Rowena said quietly. "That's not an accident. That's you." He didn't look at her. "And we are not going to leave you." She kept her voice level. "Certain. Whatever happens on the other side of this storm, we are still here after." After a long time, he shifted toward her, fractionally. The specific, careful movement of someone who wants contact but doesn't entirely trust what it costs. She put her arm around his thin shoulders. He went rigid. Then, slowly, not all at once but in increments, he leaned, his head against her arm. His breathing still ragged, but the silent crying stopped. They sat like that until the fire needed feeding, and sometime in the middle of that time, Cormac came quietly away from his window and added wood to the fire and stayed on that side of the room, not coming over, not making it something it didn't need to be made, just keeping the fire going, which was, Rowena was learning, very much how this man expressed the things he couldn't say. The storm broke on day 5, not gradually, just stopped. The way a held breath releases. Morning of day 6, Cormac went to the window and said, clear, 2 syllables, entire universe of implications. Rowena was already up, already dressed, already checking her ammunition. Amos came down from the rafters. He'd gone back up sometime during the night, old instinct. But now he came down again immediately and stood in the middle of the main room, looking at both of them, with the expression of someone who has made a decision and is not going back on it. "Cellar," Cormac said to him, gentle as his voice got. "When we give you the word," Amos shook his head. A single definitive motion, Amos. Another shake, smaller, but no less definite. Cormac looked at Rowena, Rowena looked at Amos. At the rifle he was holding. At the way he was holding it. Grip exactly where Cormac had adjusted it. Posture exactly what she'd shown him. "When we say cellar," she said carefully, "you go. No argument. If something goes wrong before we say it," she stopped, started again. "If you hear shots and you don't hear our voices, you go down and you stay down. No matter what you hear, no matter how long it takes. You don't come out until one of us comes to get you." He looked at her for a long moment, nodded. "Once careful," he said. The word came out rough, barely audible. The voice of someone who hasn't used it in a very long time and finds it doesn't fit exactly right anymore, but uses it anyway because nothing else will do. Both of them went still, 9 months. No words, not one, and the first one he chose was this. Cormac's jaw worked. He looked at the floor, looked back at Amos. "Yeah," he said. voice not entirely steady. "Yeah, we'll be careful." They came at mid-morning, which was smart. Not dawn. Trails were still dangerous in the earliest light. Ice from overnight mid-morning, when the sun had been up long enough to make the snow surface manageable. Quill was tactical. She'd give him that. Rowena was in position on the outcropping before she heard them. 15 feet up, behind a scatter of pine boughs, Cormac had placed specifically for this. She could see the main trail approach, clear, long, with the natural funnel of the two rock formations creating the choke point she'd identified on the map. Below and left invisible, unless you knew where to look. Cormac behind a fallen log that had come down 2 winters ago and looked like part of the landscape. They came around the bend below. She counted 9, 10, and then Quill. And beside him, a heavy-set man in a coat that cost more than the horses under most of these men. Older, red-faced. Riding with the posture of someone accustomed to having the money and not accustomed to having to be present when it did its work. Silas Greer. He'd come himself, which meant he wasn't confident enough in the outcome to stay at a distance. Which meant he was nervous. Which meant he understood that Amos alive was a genuine threat to him. Good. Nervous men made mistakes. She sighted down the barrel, controlled her breathing the way she'd practiced, the way she'd taught Amos. Decision happens before the trigger. By the time the trigger moves, you've already chosen. She'd chosen. She put her crosshairs on the lead hired gun. Cormac's position covered Quill's flank, waited for them to enter the narrow corridor between the outcrop arms. They entered. She and Cormac fired at the same moment. The world came apart. The first 3 seconds were clean. 2 men down, horses screaming, the rest scattering, diving for whatever cover existed, which in the funnel was limited to the outcroppings themselves and the shallow ditches at trail's edge. Quill was shouting orders. She could hear his voice, but not the words over the echo. And then things got complicated. Rowena worked the bolt, fired. A hired gun going for Cormac's flank, went down clutching his leg. Not dead, but out of the fight. She worked the bolt again, sighted. The echo was making it hard to locate Quill. Below her, Cormac was firing with his characteristic economy. 1 shot. Reload. 1 shot. Deliberate. Measured. 2 more men had taken cover behind the outcroppings themselves, trying to work around the sides. And then the shot she hadn't expected. From above, behind her, a crack. Something whispered past her ear, close enough that she felt it. Reflex threw her flat. She pressed against the rock face, as another shot punched through the space, where her head had been an instant before. Someone had climbed. One of Quill's men had broken off from the main group and scaled the back of the outcropping while the attention was on the front. Good tactics. She acknowledged this even as she rolled sideways and lost her footing on ice and slid. 8 feet, she hit a shelf of rock. The rifle skittered, fell somewhere she couldn't see. Above her, boots on stone. Coming down. She drew her knife. The man appeared above the edge. Young, moving fast. Rifle swinging down toward her, she launched herself upward. Got the knife into his boot, through leather, through flesh, through whatever was underneath. He screamed, lost the rifle. She grabbed his leg and pulled. He went over. The sound when he landed was not one she'd forget easily. She didn't look at him, moved, retrieved her rifle from where it had fallen into a crevice between rocks. Checked. Bent, useless. She was now down to the pistol at her belt and her knife, which was not the plan. But plans, she had found, were mostly just starting positions. She worked her way down from the outcropping, using whatever cover existed. The situation below had changed. Quill had redirected. 2 of his men were pressing Cormac's position, keeping him occupied, while Quill himself moved to flank. Cormac was reading it. She could see the calculation happening in the pauses between his shots. He was running low. She could hear it in the spacing. She moved. She came around the left side of the fallen log at a low run, got to Cormac's position. He looked at her for exactly half a second, registered the missing rifle, registered the pistol, registered that she'd been in a fight she hadn't planned for and come out of it, and turned back to his sight lines. "Quill," she said. "Circling," he said. 30 yards. Behind the eastern outcropping, Greer hasn't moved, stayed on his horse at the bend, watching, smart or cowardly. Same result either way, 2 more of the hired men broke from cover. She and Cormac fired together, she with the pistol, he with the rifle. 1 man dropped. The other took cover again, 4 down. Or down enough. Several still effective, and then Quill's voice, behind them. "Close, too close. That's enough." She and Cormac both turned. Quill had come fully around the eastern flank, while they were focused forward. He was 12 feet away, pistol up. Not pointed at Cormac, pointed at her, because he'd learned. She was the variable he hadn't accounted for the first time. The one who'd stood at the cabin door and matched him word for word. The one whose rifle had been taking his men off the trail in pairs. Neutralized the unknown variable first. 2 of his men positioned off to the sides, covering angles. Cormac's rifle was on Quill. Quill's pistol was on Rowena. His 2 men had Cormac's flanks, a specific kind of silence. "Stand down, Aldridge," Quill said. "You know I'll do it." The words landed with specific weight. The "you know I'll do it," not a threat, a reference. The kind of thing 2 men say to each other when they share a memory neither of them has ever talked about. Cormac's rifle didn't move, but his eyes did. Just for a fraction. "Put it down," Quill said, still looking at Cormac. "She walks. You walk. We take the boy and we're done here." "The boy's not here," Cormac said. "The boy is always here. You're not capable of being anywhere he isn't." A pause, almost sympathetic. "Almost. I know you, Cormac. Better than most people know themselves." "Set it down." Cormac set the rifle down, which was the worst thing Rowena had ever seen him do. Not because it was the wrong move. She understood the math. Understood that a dead Rowena solved nothing, and that buying seconds was sometimes the only currency left. But because she could see what it cost him. Setting down a weapon was a specific kind of surrender for a man like this, and his face showed every cent of it. "Smart," Quill said. He moved toward her. "Pistol still up. Now then. You're coming with me, Mrs. Petch. Or Voss. Or whatever you're calling yourself today. Rowena Aldridge," she said. "That's what I'm calling myself." Quill almost smiled. "Right. Well, Rowena Aldridge. There's a warrant with your name on it and a man's family in Colorado who'd like to see justice done. There's a man in Colorado who got what he'd been earning for years," she said, "and a family who knew what he was and paid people to keep quiet about it. That's a matter for a court. Courts are paid for by the same people who paid to keep the quiet." Quill was 6 feet from her now. 4. Close enough that she could see the specific expression on his face. Not malice exactly. Something more businesslike. This was a job. Quill treated everything as a job. He'd always treated everything as a job. She understood suddenly why Cormac had left the Pinkerton agency. 3 feet. "Turn around," Quill said. She didn't turn around. Turn. The shot came from behind him. Not from Cormac, not from the tree line. From the trail. From the direction they'd all come from, which was where no one should have been. Quill's expression did something Rowena had never seen on his face before. Confusion. Genuine, total confusion. He looked down at the exit wound in his chest with the expression of a man encountering a logical impossibility. Then his legs gave. He went forward, which meant she had to step sideways fast to avoid him. He hit the snow, behind where he'd been standing, far back, 50 yards up the trail, almost to the tree line where the path began. Amos, standing there with the rifle she'd given him. Small as a question mark against the white, the gun almost as tall as he was. Smoke curling from the barrel, his hands were not shaking. That was the thing she'd remember. She'd remember it for the rest of her life, the absolute stillness of his hands. The 2 hired men who'd been covering Cormac's flanks looked at the child who'd just shot their employer, looked at each other, looked at Cormac, who was already picking up his rifle. Did the remaining mathematics. They ran, and from behind Amos, on the trail, hoofed beats retreating fast. Greer, gone, running. The man who'd paid for all of this. The man who'd burned a family to the ground to take their land. The man who'd wanted a 7-year-old boy gone so there'd be no one left to say what he'd seen. Running. Cowards, it turned out, were still cowards even when they had money, especially when they had money. Amos set the rifle down. Not dropped, set tight carefully. The way she'd taught him. You don't throw firearms. But the second it left his hands, something left him too. His legs buckled. He sat down in the snow where he stood, 50 yards up the trail, and the stillness of his hands finally broke. He was shaking, his whole body. Everything at once, Rowena was running before she decided to run. She covered 50 yards and reached him, and went to her knees in the snow, and he made a sound. The first sound she'd heard from him that wasn't a whisper or a syllable, a real sound, a child's sound. The sound of someone who has held everything together for every possible second and cannot hold it one moment more. She pulled him in. He came apart against her shoulder, shaking, crying, making sounds he'd been unable to make for 9 months, because he'd been alone, and there had been no one safe to make them for. She held on. Behind her she heard Cormac. His uneven gait. He'd taken something in his leg during the fight. She'd seen him favor it, hadn't had time to address it. He came and crouched down beside them in the snow and put his arm around them both. His big arm. His scarred arm. The arm that had done things under orders, that he'd spent years on a mountain trying to come to terms with. And held on to. Nobody said anything. Because sometimes things happen that are bigger than language, and you either sit with them or you lie about them. And these were people who'd had enough of lying from. The tree line, a raven called once. Silence after. Snow drifting down from a branch somewhere. 3 people in the snow on Iron Peak, in December of 1883. 1 man who came here to disappear. 1 woman who came here to survive. 1 child who'd been waiting, without knowing he was waiting for someone to come. All 3 of them, finally, in the same place at the same time. Getting Cormac back to the cabin almost killed them. Not because of the distance. A 1/4 mile. Nothing under normal circumstances, except his leg had a bullet through it, and he outweighed Rowena by 100 pounds of solid, stubborn refusal to be carried. And Amos, still shaking, still coming back from wherever a child goes when he does something that large, had wedged himself under Cormac's left arm, and was taking weight he shouldn't have been able to take. 7 years old. Taking the weight of a man twice his height, because that was who Amos was. That was who he'd always been underneath the silence, and the rafters, and the 9 months of survival arithmetic. Someone who carried things. They moved, slow, 1 step, then another. Cormac didn't make a sound the whole way, not one. Almost there, she said. I know where my own cabin is, he said so. Not alarming then, they got him inside, got him to the chair. She pulled up his pant leg. Through and through. Which was the better of the 2 options, except the bullet had done something to the meat of his thigh on the way that made her breath go tight. Not an artery, he'd have been dead on the trail if it was an artery, but close. And bleeding with intention, you have to cauterize it, Cormac said. I know, the knife. In the fire. Until it, I know what cauterization is. She was already at the fire. Already finding the right knife, the flat-bladed one. I've done it before, a pause. On a person? On myself, she put the blade in the coals. Gerald broke 3 of my ribs in the 2nd year. 1 of them punctured something. I dealt with it, silence from the chair. Alone, she added, because she wanted him to understand the full scope of what dealt with it meant. I understand, Cormac said quietly. I know you do. She heated the blade until it glowed. Amos stood at the far end of the room. She'd told him he didn't have to watch. He'd shaken his head. He was going to watch. He was going to be present for this. She'd recognized that decision and not argued with it. Some things you witness because looking away is its own kind of abandonment. This is going to. She started. Do it, Cormac said. She did it. The sound he made was the worst sound she'd heard since the worst night in Pueblo. This was a strong man, a disciplined man, a man who'd spent 20 years building walls between himself and the expression of pain. And this broke through every one of those walls. She held the blade steady, counted to 4, pulled it away, heated it again. For the entry side, counted to 4 again. When it was done, Cormac's face was the color of old ash. He was conscious, just barely. His hands gripped the chair arms with the specific intensity of a man hanging on by decision alone. Worse than a bullet, he said. Usually is. Good information. For next time, she almost smiled. Almost. There won't be a next time. You say that. She wrapped the wound properly, real bandaging. Tight enough to matter. She'd learned that too, alone in Pueblo with shaking hands, and the knowledge that no one was coming to help. When she finished, Cormac's eyes were closing. Sleep, she said. I should sleep. Not a suggestion. He slept. She went back out. Because 7 men lay on a mountain trail in December, and the mountain didn't care, but spring eventually came to everyone, and spring had a way of presenting its accounting. Amos tried to follow her. She stopped him at the door, crouched down. Eye level. No, she said. Simple, he looked at her. That measuring look. Running his calculations, I need you here, she said. He wakes up, you give him water. You keep the fire. That is the job right now, and it is not a small job. He thought about this. Nodded. If I'm not back before dark, you'll be back, he said. No question, no hedging. Just certainty stated as fact. The absolute confidence of a child who has decided that certain things are simply going to be true. She looked at him for a moment. Yeah, she said. I will. 7 bodies. 7 trips through snow, to the ravine east of the trail. She didn't count them as people while she worked. She'd learned this in Pueblo too. The capacity to make necessary things mechanical. To move through them without letting them be fully real until you're somewhere safe enough for reality to land. Quill was last. She stood over him before the final trip and looked at him. The way you look at something you need to understand. He hadn't been entirely wrong as a person. He'd been a man who'd made a series of reasonable-seeming choices that accumulated into something that ended here. He'd taken money. He'd used authority he wasn't entitled to. He'd pointed a gun at her. And a 7-year-old boy had shot him because that was the thing nobody planned for. Nobody ever planned for Amos. She dragged him to the ravine. The snow was already covering the signs of the fight when she finished. Not completely, but enough. Spring thaw and mountain weather, and the particular disinterest of wilderness in human affairs would do the rest. She collected the weapons. Rifles, pistols, ammunition, knives, everything useful. She'd trade the excess in a different town, under a different name when the time came. Waste nothing. That was the mountain's first lesson, and she'd learned it. She was hauling the last of the weapons back when she heard it. Hoofbeats, single rider. Coming up from below, she dropped the bundle, rifle up, waited. The rider came into view at the tree line, old, moving slow, a mule instead of a horse. He raised both hands before she could decide anything. Ezra Fitch. He called across the clearing. I'm on Cormac's side, have been for 30 years. You can shoot me if you disagree with that assessment, but I'd prefer you didn't. She lowered the rifle. Slightly. How do you know Cormac, she said. Same way everybody worth knowing knows anybody worth knowing. He did something for me when he didn't have to. Pulled me out of a ravine. Carried me 5 miles on his back. The old man dismounted with the careful mechanics of someone who has made peace with his joints but not surrendered to them. Saved my life. I owe him. That's a debt I take seriously, she looked at him. Calloused hands. Eyes that had spent 60-some years deciding what they were going to see and what they weren't. Not a man performing honesty. A man who was just honest because he'd gotten old enough to find pretense exhausting. Come inside, she said. Cormac was awake when they came in, not fully, but enough. He opened his eyes when he heard the door, and the specific relaxation of his face when he saw Ezra told her everything she needed to know about whether to trust this man. You look terrible, Ezra said. You look old, Cormac said. I am old. It's a privilege. The old man settled into the second chair like he'd sat in it before. I take it Quill won't be filing any more reports. Not in this territory. Good. He was a bad piece of work and the world has enough of those. Ezra looked at Rowena. Greer rode through Settlers Creek about 2 hours ago. Moving fast, didn't stop. Heading south, he'll regroup, Cormac said. He'll try. Ezra reached into his coat, pulled out a folded document, set it on the table. But this complicates his regrouping considerably. What is it? Cormac said, signed statements. From 3 separate witnesses, placing Silas Greer at a meeting with the men who conducted the Harrington homestead raid in March. Collected over 4 months by a man who suspected what Greer was doing to that valley, and had the patience to wait for proof. Ezra looked at Cormac steadily. Territorial prosecutor in Silver City has copies already. Greer's land claims are frozen pending investigation. Silence. You've been building this case, Cormac said. Since the spring. Since I found out you'd found the boy. The old man's voice was level, a child who could testify to what he'd seen. A child Greer needed eliminated. He paused. I was not going to let that happen. From the corner, Amos was watching Ezra with those enormous eyes. Not afraid. Not calculating. Something different. There's something else, Ezra said. He reached back into his coat. A second document, also folded. He set this one down separately. Rena reached for it. Adoption certificate, Ezra said. Legal and properly witnessed. Judge Harmon in Silver City, a man who has seen enough of what money does to families, to have strong feelings about children being returned to people who want them dead. He paused. It's dated 6 months back. 6 months back we hadn't, no, you hadn't. Ezra looked at Cormac. Then at Rowena. Then at Amos. The judge and I took some liberties with the calendar, which technically makes it fraud, which neither of us intends to lose sleep over. Rowena picked up the certificate. Amos Harrington. It read, legally adopted. Guardian, Cormac Aldridge and Rowena Aldridge. A judge's seal. Witnesses. Dated in June. She read it again. Cormac reached over and took it from her. Read it himself. His face did something complicated during that reading, pain and grief and something she didn't have a precise name for moving through in sequence. Amos, he said. The boy looked up. Come here. Slow. Amos crossed the room, stood in front of Cormac's chair. Eye level, because Cormac was sitting and Amos was small, and this was the first time they'd been exactly the same height. Cormac held up the paper. You understand what this says? Amos looked at it. His eyes moved across the words, with the careful attention of someone who could read but didn't fully trust what they were reading. He looked up. Yours, Cormac said. You're ours now. On paper and off it. Nobody can use legal language to take you anywhere. Amos's face did what faces do when something you stopped letting yourself want finally arrives. It broke, not in pieces. Not badly. Just open. The way a fist opens when the tension finally leaves. Cormac pulled him in, awkward, one arm, because the other side was the wounded leg, and the mechanics were difficult. And Cormac was not a man who'd had recent practice with this kind of cock contact. So it was imperfect, bumped foreheads and wrong angles, and a moment where neither of them knew quite how to make it work. But Amos grabbed Cormac's shirt with both hands and held on. So it worked. Rowena looked at the fire. Because some moments are private even when you're in the same room. Ezra stayed the night. Ate the rabbit stew Rowena made. More rabbit than stew, honestly. But nobody complained, and told them what he knew about the situation in Settlers Creek. About Quill's associates, who'd need to be dealt with. About Greer's lawyers, already earning their money. And then, there's a woman staying at Dutch Herman's place. Rowena's coffee cup stopped moving. Denver woman, Ezra said carefully. Says she's a journalist. Asking about Cormac's brides. Specifically about why they leave. Name, she said. Dawes. Harriet Dawes. Rowena set the cup down because she knew that name. Had grown up knowing it. Gerald's older sister had been born Harriet Petch and married a man named Dawes. And moved to Denver and become the kind of woman who decided that intelligence was a better inheritance than money. She wrote for the Denver paper. She asked questions that people with money preferred not to have asked. And she was smart enough to have followed the trail from Pueblo to Silver City to Settlers Creek. How long has she been here? Rowena said. Week. Maybe a bit more. Ezra looked at her. She's not the law, Mrs. Aldridge. But she has connections to people who are, and she hasn't stopped asking. Rowena looked at Cormac. He looked back at her. I'll go down, she said. Not alone, you can't, not alone. His voice was the Flatiron version. No room for discussion. The leg heals in 2 weeks enough to walk. We go down together. Harriet Dawes doesn't wait 2 weeks. Then we send word through Ezra. Ask her to wait. Ezra's eyebrows went up. I can do that. Woman's patient in the way of someone who's good at what she does. 2 weeks, Rowena said. 2 weeks, he agreed. The 2 weeks were their own kind of country. Cormac healed steadily, without complaint, without asking for more consideration than strictly necessary. What he did ask for, twice, was help getting to the window, because he needed to see the approaches. Because 3 days after the fight, tracks appeared in the new snow on the Eastern Game Trail. Someone checking whether the cabin was still occupied, because the world didn't stop requiring attention just because one chapter of it had been resolved. Rowena checked the approaches herself. Every morning, rifle in hand, nothing came. But the checking mattered. The checking was how you stayed alive to check again tomorrow. Amos, during those 2 weeks, became someone different. Not different the way people become different when someone fixes them or saves them. Different the way growing things are different. Naturally. From the inside, he came down from the rafters and stayed down. Entirely. He moved his sleeping position from the corner behind the woodbox to a blanket on the floor, which was an upgrade by his own metric. He ate at the table, not every meal, but most he helped. Not because he was asked, because he noticed what needed doing and did it. Firewood low, he'd drag in more. Water barrels emptying, he'd fill the snow melt bucket. The supply shelf reorganized, more efficiently, with a logic she recognized as similar to her own. He still didn't speak in sentences. Words sometimes, functional ones. Water, cold, Cormac. That last one used more frequently than the others, and always with a directional component. A check that Cormac's chest was still moving. A small adjustment of the blanket over the man's legs, when he thought no one was watching. He was watching over Cormac the way Cormac had been watching over him for 9 months. Rowena saw this and said nothing about it, 'cause some things are exactly right, and commenting on them changes what they are. On the 8th day, Amos drew a new picture. She found it on the table in the morning. Paper and charcoal, left where she'd see it. Not hidden, not offered directly, just present. Available to be found the cabin. Their cabin. Detailed now in ways his earlier drawings hadn't been. The chimney with smoke rising. The wood pile stacked against the east wall. The tree line framing the clearing. The window with the shutter she'd repaired because the hinge had been loose. 3 figures outside the cabin. 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small, between the other 2, with 1 hand in each of theirs. Below the drawing, in letters that were steadier than they'd been, more practiced, more sure of themselves. This is ours, not home. Not family ours. Rowena sat down with her coffee and looked at that word for a long time. Ours was specific. Ours was exclusive. Ours meant there was a them doing the owning. A unit. A something that had a membership and a boundary and an inside. She'd been outside of things her whole life. Outside Gerald's regard. Outside the sympathy of people who saw the bruises and looked away. Outside the law that was supposed to protect her, and chose instead to protect his money. Ours put her inside something. She looked at it until the coffee went cold. Then she set the cup down and went to find a nail. On day 12, Cormac walked to the window without help. He stood there for about 2 minutes, looking out at the clearing. Snow pristine now. No tracks. No signs of what had happened 2 weeks ago except a disturbed patch at the tree line that would be gone with the next snowfall. Tomorrow, he said, Your leg is functional enough. We go tomorrow. She looked at him, at the specific set of his jaw that she'd cataloged over the past weeks. The one that meant the decision was made, and argument was decorative at this point. What if she doesn't believe us? Rowena said. Then we deal with that. He turned from the window. But she came all this way asking questions. That's not someone who wants a simple answer. That's someone who wants the right one. Rowena thought about Harriet Dawes. About the way she'd looked at Rowena across tables at Gerald's family dinners. Always that assessment, always that slight frown, as though she was running a calculation that kept coming out strange. She knew, Rowena said, slowly, arriving at it, or she suspected. She's been suspecting for years, and she came out here because Gerald is dead. And now she can finally ask the question she couldn't ask before. Because before, asking it would have cost her something. And now it costs her nothing, except the answer. They looked at each other. Some answers, Cormac said, are the price of being a person who asks questions. They left Amos with Ezra, which Amos objected to. Significantly, not with words. But the expression on his face when they explained the plan communicated a volume of objection that most adults couldn't have managed with language. 2 days, Rowena told him. Ezra stays here. You know Ezra. Amos looked at Ezra with the expression of someone revising their opinion of a person they'd previously considered acceptable. Ezra, to his credit, didn't take it personally. I brought coffee beans, he said, real ones. And I know 3 card games that I'll teach you if you want. Amos considered this. 2 days, Rowena said again. He nodded, once. The way he agreed to things he didn't like but accepted. She put her hand on his shoulder. He leaned into it, not much, just slightly. The millimeter of contact he'd been allowing himself for 2 weeks now, and that had been, each time, its own small world. We come back, she said. I know, he said. The trail down was nothing like the trail up. She'd climbed it in darkness, in desperation, with everything behind her and nothing certain ahead. She walked down it in morning light, beside a man who moved slowly because of his leg, but steadily because that was the only speed he had, and the mountain looked completely different going this direction, smaller. Or not smaller. She could see all the way to the valley below, and the mountain was objectively enormous. But the enormity was familiar now, proportionate. Part of the landscape she lived in rather than an obstacle between her and somewhere safer. There was nowhere safer than where she'd come from. That was the thing she'd understood finally. Fully. At some point in the past 3 weeks, the understanding had stopped being intellectual and become physical, settled into her bones. What are you going to say to her? Cormac said. The truth. All of it. All of it. She watched her footing on a patch of compressed ice. I killed Gerald Leland Petch on October 14th with a kitchen knife, after 2 years of being beaten in ways that nobody who looked at me in public would have believed. She paused. I don't need her to forgive me. I need her to understand that forgiveness isn't the right framework. Cormac was quiet for several steps. What's the right framework? Survive. Simple. Final. I survived. That's not a crime. It's a fact. He nodded. They kept walking. Settlers Creek looked different too. She'd passed through it in the dark 3 weeks ago. Moving fast. Not stopping. Registering it only as obstacle and potential threat. Now she walked through it in daylight, beside a man whose reputation had apparently preceded both of them significantly. People stopped, not in a hostile way. More the way people stop when something has shifted in their mental map and they need a moment to adjust. Cormac Aldridge. Coming down the mountain. That was unusual. Cormac Aldridge. Coming down the mountain beside a woman who hadn't fled. That was unprecedented. Carter Briggs stood outside the general store and stared. 3 days, Rowena said as she passed him. He opened his mouth. Closed it. You had 3 days, she said, I believe. I won that bet for you. She kept walking. Behind her, she heard Cormac make a sound. Low, almost not there, but she'd been listening for the sounds he made, for 3 weeks now. and she knew what almost a law sounded like from him. Progress. Harriet Dawes was in the corner of Dutch Herman's saloon with a cup of coffee and a notebook. She was exactly as Rowena remembered. Dark hair threaded through with gray now, more than when Rowena had last seen her. Late 40s. Sharp face that had become sharper with age rather than softer. The kind of woman who got more herself as time went on rather than less. She looked up when Rowena walked in. The recognition was immediate. Harriet Dawes did not gasp or make any of the sounds of someone encountering a surprise. She just looked. For 3 seconds. Running her calculation, then she closed her notebook. "Sit down," she said. Rowena sat. Cormac remained standing. Slightly back. Not threatening. Not just there. The specific there of someone who has decided to be between a person they care about and any possible door. Harriet looked at him. Then at Rowena. "Your husband," she said. "Yes, you've been on the mountain. Since December 3rd. With him and our son." Harriet's expression shifted. Fractionally. "I didn't know about a child. Nobody did. Cormac found him in March. We adopted him in June." She didn't mention the date discrepancy. The judge's creative calendar was no one's business but their own. Harriet was quiet. Looking at her notebook. Not opening it. "I've been asking questions," she said finally, "for 3 weeks. About the brides who left. About Gerald's family's warrant. About you." She paused. "I've also been asking questions that aren't in my notebook." "What kind?" "The kind I should have asked 10 years ago." Harriet's voice was level. But something underneath it wasn't. Something underneath it had been not level for a long time, and had made peace with that. "Gerald's engagement before you. The woman from Colorado Springs. She had a broken arm when she left. My father said she was clumsy." Rowena said nothing. "Gerald's engagement before that. The woman from Denver. She moved to San Francisco after, and never spoke about it, and I was 23, and I thought she was strange." A pause. "I was not 23 anymore when you married him. I should have said something. You didn't know. I suspected." 2 words. The weight of a decade in them. Rowena looked at her directly. At this woman who had suspected and said nothing and had been living inside that choice ever since. "I need you to look at something," Rowena said. She reached into her coat. 2 letters, collected by Cormac through Ezra's network over the past 2 weeks. One from Margaret Farrow in Laramie, written in the careful hand of someone who'd chosen her words very precisely. One from a woman in Pueblo who'd asked that her name not be used, but had written 12 pages. She set them on the table. Harriet looked at them. "Didn't touch them yet. If I read these," she said, "I can't unread them." "No, and what you're asking is for me to." "I'm not asking you anything." Rowena kept her voice flat. "Not unkind. Just clear. You came here asking questions. Those are answers. What you do with them is yours." Harriet picked up the first letter. She read slowly. The kind of reader who moved her lips slightly, which Rowena had never noticed before, and found, in this context, almost unbearable to watch. So she looked at the wall. At Dutch behind the bar, very deliberately not watching them. At Cormac. Standing between the table and the door, he caught her eye. Just for a second, she looked back at the wall. The saloon was quiet. The fire in the corner popped. Outside wind. The ordinary sounds of a frontier town going about its ordinary business. While at this corner table, something was being decided that would change the shape of several lives. Harriet read both letters. She set the second one down. She sat with her hands flat on the table, and her eyes looking at something that wasn't in the room. 3 minutes of that. Maybe 4. Then she opened her notebook, tore out the pages she'd been filling for 3 weeks. The questions, the answers she'd collected, the names, the connections, the careful journalistic architecture she'd built to locate Rowena Petch. She tore them out in a cleaned motion, set them on the table. She reached into her coat and found a match. She lit the papers. They burned in the tin ashtray on the table between them. 3 weeks of work, the trail from Pueblo to here, all of it. She watched it burn. Gerald Petch. Harriet said quietly, "Married the wrong woman." She looked at Rowena, and she did what she had to do. Silence. My brother's family will be told the trail ended in Silver City, Harriet said. That you likely died in the mountain winter. That the warrant is effectively moot. She paused. There will be some who continue looking, but without me feeding the search. It goes cold, Rowena said. It goes cold. Harriet stood, picked up her coat, her notebook, the empty one, pages taken out. She put it back in her pocket. She looked at Cormac. Take care of her, she said. And Cormac said because he was Cormac, because he understood exactly who Rowena was, and had understood it from approximately the moment she'd walked through his doorway without flinching. He said, she takes care of herself. I just make sure she doesn't have to do it alone. Harriet Dawes looked at him for a long moment, nodded once, and walked out of Dutch Herman's saloon, and out of Settler's Creek, and back toward whatever life she'd come from, with 12 pages of a woman's testimony burning in an ashtray behind her. And the knowledge she'd always suspected settling into its final resting place. Rowena sat at the table for a moment. Just sat. Let the smoke from the burned papers drift up and away. That's it, she said. That's it, Cormac said. Sometimes things end without a fight. She looked at the ash in the tray, at the window, at the light outside that was winter pale but present. Real. I don't quite know what to do with that, she said. Yes, you do. He put his hand on the table between them. Not reaching. Just available. You go home. She put her hand over his. They sat like that for a minute. Maybe more. Dutch found something very important to do at the other end of the bar. Carter Briggs, who had come in at some point during the conversation, became suddenly absorbed in his drink. Then Rowena stood. Let's go home, she said. The climb back up took longer. Cormac's leg and the afternoon light. 3 weeks of accumulated exhaustion, catching up to them both. They went slowly, deliberately. Not the panicked dark climbing of December 3rd. Just walking. Up a mountain they knew now. On a trail that had become familiar, they didn't talk much, which was fine. Which was... Rowena had learned one of the specific gifts of this man. The quality of silence he carried was generous rather than demanding. You could exist in it without having to fill it. Halfway up, he stopped. Not because of the leg. Or not only. He was looking at the valley below. At Settler's Creek from above, the scattered lights starting to appear as the afternoon thinned toward evening. At the territory spreading south and east. Big country, harsh country, the kind that made you small and then made you bigger again if you stayed long enough. She stopped beside him. I came up here, he said, to stop. She waited. I was a Pinkerton man who did what he was ordered to do, in ways that made me someone I didn't recognize anymore. And I thought if I got far enough away from people I was supposed to be doing it for, I could just... He stopped. Stop. Did it work? For a while. He looked at the valley. Then Amos. And then you. She looked at the valley, too. At the distant small lights of a town she'd arrived in after dark, 3 weeks ago, running from everything she'd been, and everything that had been done to her. I came up here to hide, she said. That was the whole plan. Find the most frightening place anyone could think of and disappear into it. And it turns out the most frightening place anyone could think of is just a mountain, with a man who won't let himself have anything good, and a child in the rafters. She paused. And really excellent coffee. He made the sound again. The almost law. Closer this time. The coffee is good, he agreed. It's extraordinary, honestly. I don't know how you manage it up here, Ezra. He has a supplier. Ezra has a supplier. She shook her head. The man shows up with adoption papers and coffee connections. What else does he have? A very good poker face, apparently. He's teaching Amos card games. She turned to look at him. Are you concerned about this, mildly? Because Amos is worryingly quick. Yes, she almost laughed. Not quite, but close. Which was, she thought, its own kind of progress. The cabin appeared in the clearing as it always did now. Suddenly through the trees, like it had been waiting. Smoke from the chimney. Which meant the fire was going. Which meant Amos had been managing it. Light in the window. The one with the repaired hinge. Before she could knock, the door opened. Amos stood in the frame. He was not supposed to open the door for unknown approaches. She'd been very clear about this. But she supposed that after 9 months of reading approach vectors from the rafters, he'd heard them coming from far enough away to make the determination they were not a threat. She couldn't actually argue with the intelligence of this. He looked at them both. Running his check. Present. Whole. Returned as promised. Something in his face that she didn't have a word for yet. Maybe because she'd never seen it on a face directed at her before. The specific relief of someone for whom people usually left and who was still not fully over the shock of being wrong about that. "We're back," Cormac said. Unnecessary. Obvious. And true in every way that mattered. Amos stepped back from the door. But as they passed him, he put his hand out and grabbed Cormac's sleeve. "Just for a second. Just to confirm. Solid. Real. Here." Cormac put his hand over the small one briefly. Didn't stop walking. Let the contact be what it was. Small, sufficient, complete, inside, warm. The smell of food. Ezra had apparently taken the coffee connection seriously and also knew his way around a stew pot. The fire going strong. The cabin arranged exactly as she'd left it, except Amos had put his drawing on the wall. Not with a nail. He hadn't been able to reach high enough. With the heel of his boot pressed against a piece of charcoal at the corner, fixing it temporarily. It was slightly crooked. It was perfect. That evening, after dinner, after Amos had taken his blanket to the center of the floor and arranged it with the precision he brought to all arrangements, Cormac took the drawing off the wall. She watched from the kitchen area, watched him look at it. The crooked cabin, the chimney smoke, the 3 figures with one between the other 2, their small hands joined. "This is ours." He found a proper nail and a hammer. He drove the nail at the right height. The height where someone walking in the door would see it first thing. The first thing you encountered when you came in from outside. He hung the drawing straight, stood back, looked at it. Amos watched from his blanket with his head tilted in the way he had when he was determining whether something was right. Apparently it was. Because he lay back down and closed his eyes. "Good," he said. One word, sufficient May, came the way real months come on a mountain. Not the May of poetry. The real May, messy, cold at dawn, mud alternating with snow on the higher elevations, the kind of month that is only beautiful if you've been through the winter that preceded it and understand what you're looking at. The south-facing slope or soil now, almost lote, ready, Amos, stood at the edge of it, running his calculations, which had started to include things beyond the immediate category of threat or not threat. He calculated soil now. He calculated weather. He'd begun tracking the sun's pulse position across the slope in the mornings, and had, without being asked, identified the exact area that got the most direct light. Cormac was mending a section of fence along the north side of the clearing, walking without a limp now, or almost. The weather bothered it and would probably always bother it, which was a fact he'd accepted with the specific resignation of a man who has made peace with his body's opinion about past events. Rowena stood next to Amos at the edge of the slope with the seed packets Ezra had brought in carrots, beans, onions, a packet of something the label identified as possibility. "We should start today," she said. Soil's ready. Amos crouched down, pressed his fingers into the earth, examined what came up on them, rubbed it between thumb and forefinger the way she'd shown him. He looked up at her. "Are we going to plant carrots?" he said. Just that, clear, easy, like he'd been saying full sentences his whole life and had simply chosen not to until now. She went still, not the stillness of shock. The stillness of something arriving that you've been waiting for without letting yourself wait. The held breath stillness. From the fence line, she heard Cormac's mending stop, heard him go quiet the way he went quiet when something required the full attention of being human, and not just the attention of being capable. "Yes," she said. Her voice was, she wasn't sure, Steady enough. Yes. We're going to plant carrots. She paused. You like carrots? I don't know. He looked at the seed packet. I haven't had them. She thought about this. About what it meant to be 7 or 8 or whatever Amos was. They were still not entirely sure, and to have a list of things you haven't had yet. A list that was, from this side of everything, composed entirely of yet. Not never, not for me. Just yet. You're going to have them, she said. Whatever you want to grow up here. Whatever we can manage in this soil. All of it. He looked at the slope, at the dark, ready soil. At the first real garden that would be his garden. His work, all of it, he said. From the fence line. He's right. We plant everything we have. Cormac had crossed the clearing without her hearing him. He was standing at the edge of the slope with them, looking at the soil, at the seed packets in her hands. At Amos still crouching with dark earth on his fingers. He looked like a man who came to a mountain to disappear, and found instead that the mountain had other plans. Well, he said, let's start then. They planted for 3 hours, all of it. Everything Ezra had brought. Everything that had any chance of taking in this altitude, with this soil in this specific patch of sun-facing slope. Amos worked with the same focused attention he brought to everything. No wasted motion, no wandering. Just the task and the doing of it. Cormac planted in rows so straight they looked measured. Because they probably were. She'd seen him eyeball distances with the precision of a man who'd once needed to be accurate about such things, and never lost the habit. She planted in the spaces between, the gaps they left. Which was, she thought, a decent description of what she'd been doing since December. When they finished, the 3 of them stood at the edge of the slope and looked at what they'd made. A plot of turned earth with seeds in it. Nothing visible yet. Nothing to indicate what was coming. But the potential was there. The work was done. The rest was time and weather, and the basic insistence of living things on becoming. Now we wait, Amos said. Now we wait, Cormac agreed. Rowena looked at the slope. At this man beside her who was learning, still, day by day, how to be in a place he'd chosen, rather than a place he'd retreated to. At this child between them who had survived something that shouldn't have been survived, and come out the other side with his capacity for trust. Damaged, not destroyed, at this mountain. Her mountain now. Theirs. Let's go inside, she said. I'll make coffee. The good kind? Amos asked. Ezra left enough for another week. He considered this. What happens when it runs out? Ezra comes back and brings more? He has a supplier. Amos filed this information in the way he filed everything. Completely, permanently. Good, he said. With the satisfaction of a person who has confirmed that a necessary resource has a reliable source, she almost laughed. She actually laughed. The sound of it, it went up into the mountain air and the mountain received it. The way mountains receive everything. Without comment, without judgment. Keeping its own accounting, and somewhere in the valley below, Settler's Creek went about its ordinary business, entirely unaware that up on Iron Peak, in a cabin that had seen 24 departures, nobody was leaving. Not today. Not ever, if she had anything to say about it, which she did. Which, finally, she did.